Hi, my name is Ryan Kopinski, and this is Getting Started with RealityKit. So today, I'm going to help you create your first augmented reality application using RealityKit on iOS. Let's take a look. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll create a new project in Xcode, and we're going to select Augmented Reality app. You can give your app a name. I'm going to call mine Basic AR App. You're free to call it whatever you want. The important part here is that you select Swift as a language, RealityKit as the content technology, and for user interface, I'm selecting storyboards. You can select Swift UI, but this video will not actually cover that. And so we're just gonna stick with storyboards. We're gonna create our new project. And in this video, I assume that you are familiar with iOS development and Swift, and that just augmented reality is new to you. And so this should look familiar to you. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the view controller, and we are going to remove the default code that comes with the application, which is the view.load method. And so what we're going to do next is we are going to import ARKit, because we are going to use some components of ARKit. And then the fun actually starts. So what we're going to do is we are going to override our view didAppear lifecycle method. So here we're going to call super view didAppear animated. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to set up our AR view. Now in RealityKit, our AR view is automatically configured for us, but there's a reason why I want to show you how to do this, because when you do advanced AR applications, you will likely want to override the default configuration. And so we are going to create a method called setupARView. It's going to give me an error because we haven't defined this yet. And so we are then going to create a setup methods. So we're going to define it right here. So setupARView. Okay, so there are a few things that we have to do to set up our AR view. Now, the first is we are going to disable the automatic configuration of our AR view. So we're going to do arView.automatically configure session, and we are going to set that to false because we're going to have our own. Then we're going to create a new configuration, and we're going to instantiate an AR world tracking configuration. There are multiple configurations that you can use: world tracking, image tracking, and face tracking. In this scenario, we're gonna focus on world tracking because we want to place an object into our space, our physical space. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna set our configuration. We wanna set a view flags, and so we're gonna set plane detection. We want to enable both horizontal plane detection and vertical plane detection. So we are providing in this instance an array of enum values. Okay, and then our configuration, what we're going to do next is we also want to automatically texture our environment. And what this will do, it'll install reflections and make our objects that we place in our environment look as realistic as possible. And that's very important to make the AR experience as believable as we can. And so we're going to set this to automatic. Keep in mind that environment texturing is only available for iOS 12 and up on specific devices. And so, if you're going to support anything lower than that in terms of the iOS version, make sure that you have some type of if statement to check for that. Okay, and then we're going to do our AR view, and we're going to run our newly created configuration. Okay, so this is essentially how we set up our AR view. And in the background, if you have the default configuration, it looks very similar to this. So what we'll do next is, let's see. Okay, what we'll do next is we'll create a TapGestureRecognizer to sense when the user is tapping on the screen, and we'll have a function that is then called to see if we're tapping. We'll send kind of like a raycast into the scene, which is kind of almost like a laser pointer. If you can imagine a laser pointer and you're pointing at like a table or the wall, you would see the pointer on there. And so it's sending a virtual laser to see if it's intersecting with any surfaces that we have recognized. So whether it's horizontal surfaces or vertical surfaces. And so let's create our gesture recognizer. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, ARView dot add gesture recognizer. And what we'll do is we'll create a UI tap gesture recognizer. And what we're going to make our target is self, so just the AR view. And our selector, our action, we're going to make a selector. So I'll always have to look this up because it's always a bit hard for me to remember. So we have our selector, and we're going to say handle. We're going to call this selector handleTap, and then recognizer, like that. So this is what we're going to call it. I know there's a lot of like parentheses, but just bear with me. There's now an error, and it's saying use of unresolved identifier. So now we have to essentially create that method to handle the tap. And so we're going to do object placement. We're going to work on object placement now. And so in this, we're going to say, okay, because we are using this selector syntax over here, it really has to have an Objective-C flag. Yeah, it's just to make it work. I don't want to go too much into depth on this, so just make sure that you add Objective-C before the function. And now you can write the function handleTap. Let's see, handleTap. I have some notes on my computer, so that way I don't forget to mention anything. And then we're going to write our recognizer, and it's going to be a UI tap recognizer. And so when someone taps, it essentially calls this function. Okay, so there are a few things that we have to do here. What we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, the user is tapping on our screen. So if you have your phone, right, it's tapping on the screen, and we have to translate that to a coordinate in space. And so that takes some logic. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, let location equals recognizer dot location in UI view, and we're going to select AR view. So this is getting the location in the AR view. And then what we're going to try to do is use the raycast to find if it's intersecting with any real world physical surface. And so since we have plane detection enabled, this should have some results if it actually does. And so we're going to say, okay, let equal results AR view dot raycast. And so we want to send a raycast from our location that we tapped, and we want allowing. So for allowing, you can say an estimated plane, existing plane geometry, or existing plane infinite. Feel free to Google these and read the documentation, but for this, we're just going to use an estimated plane. We don't need it to be super accurate, and so we're just going to use estimated plane. And then for our alignment is essentially, do we want to have any horizontal or vertical? In this case, we're only going to focus on horizontal surfaces. And so I'm going to put a object that I purchased online. If you want to see how to do that, you can click here, or I'll add the link in the description below. But I'm going to add that object into our scene. Okay, so now we're making the raycast. Okay. The next thing that we have to do is we have to see if there was anything returned. So did it actually hit a flat surface that was horizontal? And so we're going to say, okay, if let first result, because this returns an array of all the things it essentially finds. First, okay. And then if we actually have a result, then that means we actually found a horizontal surface. And so what we're going to do now is we are going to create a new anchor. So in order to place objects into our scenes, we always have to add them to anchors. The reason we do that is when in future videos, I'll show you how to create multi-user AR experiences. And to synchronize the scene, it needs to be attached to an anchor. And so we're going to create a new anchor, AR anchor. And what we're going to do is we are going to use the name and transform, and we're going to call this contemporary fan. So we're going to name this anchor the name of the asset or the 3D object that I will use to place in the scene. Okay, and then we're going to use first result will transform. And so we want to add an anchor or create an anchor that is at the orientation and the position of our surface. Okay, and that's the world transform. So this includes the location, but also the way it's oriented. So once we have that, then what we're going to do is we are going to add this anchor to our session. And then what we'll also want to do is if we don't have a result, then we're going to create an else statement. And for now, you would likely want to have some type of pop-up or a message shown to the user saying, hey, we couldn't find a service, move around your phone, map out the environment more, or turn on the lights if it's too dark. But we're just going to write a print statement for now. Object placement failed, couldn't find service. Okay, so that's that. And then what we're going to do next is, now this is an important part. In RealityKit, you can actually place objects much easier than this. But I'm also using ARKit, which is the AR anchors, because in a future episode, I'm going to do something more advanced that requires the use of ARKit. And so just hang in there. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create an extension to our view controller. And we're going to conform to AR_session_delegate. So we're going to inform to that. And the function that we want to implement out of our AR_session_delegate is the didAdd anchors. And the reason why we want to do that is in our handleTap function, we added an anchor to our session. And now that we have an anchor, a new anchor, we want to actually place our object into our scene using our delegate method, didAdd anchors. And so in our method, what we're going to do is we are going to say, okay, for anchor in anchors, we want to see if our, so if let anchor name, it should have a name because we gave it one. Anchor.name, and then we're going to say, okay, if our anchor name equals contemporary fan, then what we want to do is we want to actually place this object into our scene. And so we're going to write a function placeObject named, and we're going to, so this function does not exist yet, but I'm writing the signature of it, and then we're going to actually create this function. For anchor. And so this is kind of like what we want to write in our next function. So we place an object with a name for that specific anchor. And so what we're going to do next is to create this placeObject function. Okay? And so over here, we'll go here and we'll say, okay, function placeObject. And then we want to do named entity name. This is a string, and then we have for anchor, this is an AR anchor. And so this is essentially our empty function. Okay, so what we're going to do next, this is where the fun starts. We're gonna create a model entity because all objects in our RealityKit scene are essentially entities, and in this case, model entities. And so we're going to say, okay, let entity equals model entity dot load model, and then we are going to say named. Now, something important, when I was using the autocomplete, you could see it throws, which means it can throw an error if that model doesn't exist. And so I know that this model exists. I'm going to essentially just say, we're going to force try that. But if you don't know if it exists, make sure that you create an optional. And then what we're going to do next is we are going to create an anchor entity. So now that we have our model, we essentially want to add it to an anchor entity. And then the anchor entity is added to our scene. So I know it's a lot of steps, but essentially we create a model entity, you create an anchor entity, and then you add it to your scene. Got it. Okay, so let anchor entity equals anchor entity, and we want to instantiate it with the anchor that is being passed in, which was the one that we created in our session. And then we're going to say, okay, anchor entity, add child, and this is where we want to add our model that we created, our contemporary fan in this case, but it can be anything. It could be a sphere, a cube, whatever model that you have. And then we're going to use our arView.scene.addAnchor. Okay, and then we're going to add our anchor entity. So to recap, you create a model entity using load model, you then create an anchor entity, and then you add it to your scene. Okay, so we're actually almost done. Now, just to add a bonus to this, what we're going to do is I'll show you how simple it is to actually add gestures to your models. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, entity generate collision shapes, and this is going to enable us to actually move it into our scene, so to essentially drag it and rotate it. And so we're going to say true, and then we're going to say arView.install gestures for okay, and what we want in this case rotation and translation, and we want to install them for our entity. And so this is really all the object placement code that we need to do. And so let's see if we have anything else. Oh, I forgot one thing, and I always forget this. Since we are implementing our AR session delegate, we actually have to assign our session delegate in our view did appear. And I almost forgot it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do arView.session.delegate equals self. Otherwise, our didAdd anchors will not be called. Okay, so I think that's what we needed to do. Let's run it and see how it looks. Okay, so I'm going to run it on my phone now. Make sure that if you're testing an AR app that you're actually running it on a physical device, because most AR apps you can test on a simulated device. And so, okay, I'm installing the app now on my phone. It's saying running. Okay, so now it's asking if it can access the camera because our AR session will use the camera. And so I'm going to say okay. And let's see. So I'm going to kind of like try to map the scene out a bit. And then I'm going to place our fan. Boom. And we crashed. The reason why we crashed, and I actually wanted this to happen, the reason why we crashed is we don't have our model yet. And so this is a good example to show you how to add a model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my file. In this case, we forced our unwrapping of the model entity, and it didn't exist. And so now we have to find it. Let's see. So our app, contemporary fan, and so I'm going to add my model now, which in this case is an object that I purchased from TurboSquid a while back. I actually did a video on it, so that link will be in the description. But this is a really cool model, right? You can see this cool fan. And so before I'm going to run this again, over on the right here, you can see that the dimensions are in meters. And this fan, I can guarantee you, is not 25 meters wide. And so what tends to happen is when you purchase models, sometimes they're in different units, in this case, centimeters. And so we want to scale every single axes, every single axis by 0.01, just so that we have the right scale. Okay, and so what we're going to do next is we are going to run this again. And now it should work. If it doesn't work, then, you know, then I failed. Okay, so we are going to just move the phone around just so I can map the environment a little bit. And then we're going to add our fan. And there we go. And that's our fan. And so you can move it and you can rotate it. Obviously this is really cool, but you can see how awesome it looks and how you can have like the reflections and the lights are reflected on this material. And so you can see how, you know, in a pretty short amount of time, we were able to create a basic AR app where you can place objects into your world scene. Now, from here, you can do much more advanced things. And so one of the things I've been experimenting with is how to create a multi-user AR experience where you can have multiple people using iPhones and iPads, and they can all see the same object. And so if you're interested in that video, subscribe, and I'll make sure to link it somewhere here or in the description below once that video is also live. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to see more videos like these.